I volunteered and joined the U.S. Coast Guard in the fall of 1942 and was immediately assigned to camp at Manhattan Beach on the East Coast, where in addition to the usual training, we were instructed daily in judo and boxing, supervised by the world champion heavyweight Jack Dempsey, a lieutenant commander in the Coast Guard. He and I had occasion to have some very interesting conversations, and I learned that he later served in the South Pacific. It seems my life has had its share with chance encounters with some famous people over the years, memories that are as vivid today as they were back then. Born in New York City on January 15, 1922, I remember clearly the very dark days of the Great Depression. And in order to help my folks out, I sold newspapers on a Brooklyn street corners when I was 11 and 12 years of age. And my first job out of high school was working for the New York Post newspaper for $15 a week. One of my special memories as a kid growing up in New York City was a time I was part of a gala event held in the fall of 1935 to honor Lou Gehrig, the Iron Man of the Yankees. It was organized by one of my relatives, and I was fortunate enough to sit next to Lou Gehrig and a group of Yankees that evening. And they were all amused to find out that I wasn't a Yankee fan, but I was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And later that week, I attended a meeting with New York's Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia at City Hall with a number of important people in the city, who presented Gehrig with a 6-foot Louisville Slugger bat signed by thousands of fans who wanted to show how much they loved and respected the great athlete. After Pearl Harbor, I was still underage to have a draft number, and so I volunteered with the Coast Guard primarily because as a kid I had enjoyed reading about their origins during the early days of America. In early 1943, I was assigned to pier guard duty in Hoboken, New Jersey, while being billeted at the local YMCA. Later I learned it was directly across the street from where Frank Sinatra grew up. We were scheduled to be shipped out to assist in the construction of a naval submarine base in Ireland. Instead, suddenly I was told to pack my sea bags, report to Coast Guard intelligence in Lower Manhattan. Since they had no sleeping facilities available, we were given $3 a day to fend for ourselves. Working at Coast Guard intelligence was not only interesting, but it was vital to the war effort. In addition to checking out all military and civilian personnel assigned to military ships and facilities, I was assigned to pick up and deliver top-secret documents from Navy intelligence. Documents that included dates and routes for upcoming, incoming, and outgoing convoys and other sensitive materials. I knew this information could affect the lives of thousands of our guys and felt pretty nervous about having it fall into the wrong hands. In addition to my duties in intelligence, I briefly served aboard a Coast Guard seagoing tugboat that patrolled the buoys in the North Atlantic seas. I think sometimes people forget while most of the fighting was going on in Europe and in the South Pacific, there were serious potential threats to America that were closer to home. An example of this stands out sharply in my mind, as I was ordered never to talk about it, and I'm only now telling the story. In 1940, the Normandy, a French-owned ship second in size only to the Queen Mary, was tied to a pier in New York Harbor when the Germans marched into Paris. The United States government took possession of the ship since it was in American territory. And during the ship's overhaul, the Normandy suddenly caught fire, turned over on its side, and became virtually useless for the rest of the war. The official report says a welder's blowtorch set off the blaze. But I learned later from some shipmates who were summoned to help save the ship that fires had erupted in many places simultaneously. And what was more disturbing was that the emergency fire hoses had all been cut and slashed and made inoperable. In other words, it was German sabotage. I was told to keep my mouth shut by an ensign, which I have done up until now. However, I think this is something to reflect on, especially when today America is still facing threats to its security from terrorists who have demonstrated interest in attacking us here at home. One night in the winter of 1944, another interesting encounter for me. I was on a 48-hour Liberty walking along Midtown Broadway when I spotted a woman standing alone in a theater lobby. It was Eleanor Roosevelt herself, the president's wife. Naturally, I wanted to meet the wife of the then president and started to walk up to say hello when two Secret Service men came out of nowhere and wrestled me to the ground. Fortunately, the First Lady spoke up quickly and said, "Leave that sailor alone. He just wants to talk." And that's what we did for the next 5 or 6 minutes, having a real delightful conversation. She was truly a wonderful person and probably the most famous woman in the world at that time. When the war finally ended in August of 1945, there were people hysterically celebrating everywhere. I was walking and watching them when I was suddenly surrounded by a bunch of people who were celebrating. Some young women hugged me and grabbed my white hat and threw it into a bonfire that was burning right there in the street, saying, "Sailor, you won't need this anymore." Incidentally, I met another wonderful young lady during the war. Her name was Rena. She was working at a Navy War Bond office when we both met at a USO. And as they say, we fell in love and have stayed that way ever since. She's been my best friend and wife now for more than 65 years and counting. I hope she'll share her story of service, as she has been a community activist fighting for positive change all of her life. As I look back on my years of service during World War II, the best advice I can offer the next generation is to simply remember the Coast Guard motto, always ready. Always be prepared for what may come your way. You never know how a chance encounter might change your life. Today, Rena and I live in the Villages here in San Jose, California.